Yeah, it's all remote. I've had a few that were in person, but 95% have been remote.
Right. Well, let's get into your show. Let's talk about what the show is and get to know you a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good. Where do you want to
So,
start?
well, we'll start where we start with everyone, and everyone who listens is rolling their eyes. Where were you born and raised?
That's right. I love it. I love it. Yeah. The cool thing about this is my story is, starts Oregon, right? So Steelhead, West Coast Steelhead. That's my dad was a guide on the Deschutes River as a little kid. So
Right.
I grew up fishing, as long as I can remember. He had a little fly shop outside of Portland, and I was a little kid running around the shop, and that's pretty much how most of my childhood went. It's kind of funny because I joke about this a little bit because the spade thing, I know all this stuff was going on, even on the Deschutes, right, with Hazel and everybody, but I kind of missed the boat on that a little bit because my dad was a dedicated, hardcore, single-handed fisherman. So because of that, I didn't get into spade till much later, and actually to my first Skeena trip in the kind of, I think it was 08, 09, where I was like, oh my God, I got to learn to spay. So I took a Simon Gosworth video off the shelf, watched it over and over again, went down to the Nehalem and practiced my cast, as much as I could for a month. And then it was lucky I did it because it was a good trip. So long story short, that's where it starts to shoot Steelhead, but we've kind of expanded from there into, with the podcast, everything.
Yeah, right. Okay, so wait though. Your dad, this is all news to me.
Yeah.
Is he still around?
Yes, he is. He's in his mid 80s now, so he's actually going through a period right now of he's starting to slow down. But so he's not fishing anymore. But yeah, so Doug Stewart was, like a lot of people don't know around the country, but in Oregon, at least back in the day, he was one of the first to shoot fly guides out there.
How interesting. What happened to the fly shop?
It kind of hit the '08 crash,
Oh yeah.
that whole thing that's when it pretty much went away.
Right.
But it started, it started out as Stewart Custom Tackle back in the '70s, like when I was born. So it was tackle, it was a little bit of everything. It was, on the west side of Port or the east side of Portland, it was like the only shop out there. So it was that, but then we changed it. It became Stewart's Fly Shop, right, for the longest time. So yeah, it was always pretty little, a small shop. It wasn't anything huge, but it basically paid the bill for, four boys and a family. So it did well.
I'm amazed that I'm not amazed by, I should actually just clarify. I'm not amazed that it would take a hard financial hit, but
Yeah.
I am a little bit curious as to why you and three brothers didn't take over the shop.
Yes, that's a good question. And actually, I mean, it was a couple to answer that. A couple of my brothers did at a time try to do that, and I was doing some other things. So at the time, I wasn't. I've always been into fly fishing. That's always been high on my to do list, but it just wasn't in my. I wasn't thinking business was going to be my thing. The funny thing is that look full circle now, and I've got this podcast which is all focused on sponsorship, and it's got a whole program. So I've come full circle. And the interesting thing is that I actually think of the shop a lot now as I'm working with the podcast. And yeah, it's hard to explain. I think now if I look back on it, maybe I would have changed that and tried to keep the shop. But at the time, it was just like my brothers, wasn't going well, and I think they just let it close up.
Yeah, that's fair. So you grew up fishing though.
Yeah.
Okay. I did not know that. I thought you were a late comer to the
No,
sport. Okay, so
no.
you grew up fly fishing. What's the story? What did you end up doing after you graduated high school?
So I've done a little bit of everything. And so a big thing that I, got involved in was, I mean, the marketing came with my kids. I got into like online marketing, right? 2014. Let's see, I guess no, 2012 was when my first daughter was born, and I realized like I needed to start making some more money. And so I started listening to podcasts. And that was the big thing that I like Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income, all these online marketing guys I started listening to, and I became addicted to podcasts. And it's kind of backwards, right? Because I got into the Wet Fly Swing podcast and everything basically from trying to understand online marketing. And that's what got me going. And in 2015, I had launched the blog, and I said, you know what? In 2 years, I'm going to have a podcast. I don't know what it's going to be in, but I love podcasting so much. I'm going to have this show. And 2 years later, 2017 in December, I launched this podcast, the Wet Fly Swing podcast, and have just been, haven't missed a week since. So that's always that, the last since 2017, that's been the focus is the podcast. And as it's a lot of fun, a lot of work, but we've just kind of been growing things and trying to provide, more value and, information for everybody out there as we've been going.
Yeah. So what was the blog about to start?
So it was fly fishing. So it was always, I started out the idea being, and again, taken back to Pat Flynn, shout out to Smart Passive Income, but he was really transparent. He was the first guy when I got online. He had his income reports on the thing showing exactly where every penny was being made. And it was just this really cool guy, right? And there's other people, John Lee Dumas is Entrepreneurs on Fire. There's all these marketing guys that had podcasts, and I was learning from them. And so that was a big part of it, right? Just learning from them. And I said, you know what? Pat Flynn was a big guy on affiliate marketing at the time. So I tried to start this website, which was built on affiliate marketing, right? So you blog, you do, the funny thing was after a year, it was like ghost town. I wasn't hearing from anybody. I wasn't that good of a writer. I didn't enjoy it that much. It just wasn't going well. And then finally, when I kicked the podcast off that first month when I launched it, was the first time online anybody ever reached out to me and said, Dave, this is awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. And so I got that instant feedback on the podcast. And right away, I was like, this podcast is what I need to keep, I need to double down on this thing.
Yeah. So what was your quote unquote real job at the time? I hate
Uh,
that. But how were you making your income at the time?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of different things. I mean, I was at, when the shop was rolling, I did that. And then I've done some stuff basically around kind of restoration, conservation, and some of that. That's kind of been, basically the day job, kind of doing that type of work. So I have a background in that. But as far as all the online stuff that I've been doing, it's, mostly from the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I also do some internet, website with another partner and things like that. So that's kind of those are the two things that kind of are keeping me going. But right now, the sponsorship thing through the Wet Fly Swing podcast is what's kind of turning the wheels.
Yeah. So before we start talking about that, because I obviously, as a podcaster, have got questions. So for anyone who is not interested in podcasts right now, I mean, hopefully you're listening to the podcast because you're interested in podcasts. But
Yeah,
I am going to kind of nerd out on some things. But
yeah.
the show, tell me about the show. What is Wet Fly Swing?
So Wet Fly Swing is all fly fishing all the time. So we interviewed, similar to your show, we interview a new guest each episode for the most part. I occasionally do some solo episodes, but for the most part, new guest each episode. When we started in 2017, it was all steelhead, right? That was the first 30 episodes. I didn't quite know what I was going to getting into. So I focused on steelhead since I knew it really well. So we had Trey Combs on, we had, I think, Simon on early. So, some people I knew, Jim Teeney, a lot of the same guests. And I think I told you at the time I had been listening to your show and Orvis quite a bit. So I was starting to, those were getting the wheels turning. But yeah, it was just a lot of fun, from the very beginning. So that was the first 30 episodes. Now we're at like 630. So we do 3 episodes, full length episodes every week, a different 3 interviews. So it's this constant. Yeah, right? It's a lot. Yeah. So we're doing
No, stop.
3 a week.
Sorry. I did not know that. I thought you were doing one a week, and I thought that was crazy. Okay. Whoa. And people are probably going to learn too much about me in this episode because I'm going to share about mine too.
Yeah.
When I had sold to Meat Eater.
Oh yeah.
And then acquired my company back. Hallelujah.
Right.
My contract was an episode a week.
Yeah.
And it was really, really hard on me.
Yep.
Just not only the pressure of being, Meat Eater's primarily owned by Chernin Investment Group. So there was a major corporate pressure, but also I started to not enjoy it as much, podcasting once a week. And my numbers went up because it was Meat Eater, but they also went down because people were having a hard time keeping up with all the episodes. I found that my happy medium for my mental peace and for my listener, I think, sorry guys if I'm wrong, is 1 every 2 weeks. How do you manage to maintain your enthusiasm, your integrity, your et cetera, with 3 a week?
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. So, and I've always found I started out doing 1 a week. When I started in 2017, it was like my goal was 1 a week. I wasn't going to miss that week, whether it was a holiday, whatever, so I've done that every week since 2017. So I think we got into it about 2 or 3 years. And I just started thinking, let's try 2 a week. Let's see what happens. Because I had heard that the numbers drop a little bit and take dips on all that. So I started doing 2 a week. So we did that for about a year or so. And the numbers actually didn't drop. They dropped a little bit, but then they rebounded. And so it was more content. It was getting me interviewing more people. I was making more connections because that's the cool thing about the interview show is that you're making all these connections. You can do that, and that allows you to do some of the other stuff we're doing, which is our travel program. And so we're doing some educational stuff, a little similar to what you do, but quite a bit different. And so we have all that going, but I just took this step to, you know what, 3 a week, why not try it out? And part of this is sponsorships, right? Obviously, the more content you have come in, the more sponsors you can have. But we started doing 3 a week, and I switched it from doing Tuesday, Thursday to Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes every week. And I've been building a team along the way. So I have a team. I have three full, editors, and I have, a small team that are. I basically now, when I do an episode, I sit down, I record it like this. I put it into ClickUp. It just, the whole process is systematized, and then it goes through, and I see it when it's done. I always listen to the final recording as a final check, and then it's out the door.
Wow. Okay. 3 a week. I'm sorry. I'm
I
trying to
know.
imagine it because I admittedly am a solo everything, right?
Yeah.
There's zero team,
Yeah.
whether that's to my detriment and definitely it's not scalable, maybe, but
Yeah.
I sleep at night and I'm relaxed and I'm,
Yes.
do
See,
you ever feel like you are just churning your wheels or spinning your wheels? I mean, and also how do you find that many guests and genuinely stay like excited and
yeah.
inspired?
Yeah. I think for me, it's the finding guests is not hard. I mean, I had an episode this morning with a guest from who has fished in the kind of Yellowstone Teton, and now he's out in like the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it was a great episode. We talked about a little bit of everything. And at the end, this is the thing I used to do a lot. I'd say, "Hey, do you know a couple people who would love to have a similar conversation?" I'd ask my guest that, and so easily, boom, there's two more. And he gave me five people who I had actually, two of them I already knew. One guy was the guy who was the owner of Trout Hunter. Another person, and there's these people which were like, wow, I haven't had them on. These are huge guests. And there was five people. So I'm never going to run out of guests. We're going to probably hit 1,000 episodes eventually. And I think we will still have guests, because I find that although, when you see the big guests we had, I interviewed Yvonne Chenard, and that was an epic moment for me. That had been a big goal for me. And you do see some uptick in downloads, but we see a person who's person nobody knows. We'll see similar download levels, right?
Yeah.
They'll drop
Yeah.
a little bit, especially the one thing that when we do conservation episodes, those definitely dip. I mean, we
Yeah,
see
I
that,
found that too. Yeah.
but other than that, I mean, I do say, I will say, with the spinning the wheels, occasionally it is a lot, right? There's times where I'm overwhelmed, and and I feel like, well, do I want to get up early for this episode? And but that's part of going pro. I think that I've heard that from one of my mentors along the way. It's like the guy, I can't remember his name now, but he wrote the book, The Legend of Bagger Vance, right? I'm
Yeah.
drawing a
Yeah.
blank at his name. Well, he wrote that book, but he also wrote this book called The War of Art, or
Oh, The Art of
right,
War?
or
No,
The Art
yeah,
of Wars.
no.
Sorry,
The Art of War is a
which
classic. Was that right? Because
yeah,
there's two. There's
it's The
also
War of
The
Art.
War of Art. There are two. One's
I
a
can't remember the
classic.
name of the author. Yeah, I can't remember, but The War of Art, the guy that wrote that, is a book that I listen to over and read over and over. But his thing in that is like, he talked about the entrepreneur, and
And the
you got to
Muse.
build it.
Doesn't he talk about the
Yes.
Muse a lot?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And you got
Love
to be able
that.
to grind. And he's like, he's basically says that, you know what? It's not going to be easy to do this. And you gotta get up and you got to do it. And whenever it gets hard, I think about that. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, man, I'm going pro. This is it. You can't, it's going to be hard. It's not always going to be easy. So that's the content thing. And I do love it. I will say that 90% of the time, whatever, I love it. Every episode I sit there and we're doing this, talking to somebody about fishing, I get excited because I want to travel everywhere. I want to travel around the world, and I haven't hit any of the, where near it where I want to get, but that's my goal. So whenever I talk to somebody new, I'm excited. Gets me going.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So then what was the
Yeah.
next? So you started to get momentum with the show and you
Yeah.
realized people were actually listening. It's amazing, isn't it? Sometimes to realize people are listening.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget that there is an audience. I mean, admittedly, I often forget because then I'll get emails and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, you're listening. Thank you so much for reaching out. I think people should know that by providing feedback, it's very appreciated because
Yes.
sometimes we do feel like we're speaking to ourselves out there.
Yep.
Okay, so then what was the next step then? Because you are a business guy, I think I've
Yeah.
watched it grow over the last
Yep.
probably 5 or 6 years,
Yep.
just from what I've been observing.
Yep.
And do you struggle with that? I know for me, I was having this conversation in New Zealand the other day.
Yeah.
The guys were like, okay, tell us the deal. How much money do you make on the podcast? And I was like, okay,
Right.
everybody sit down. Get ready for this. Get ready. Zero. Because
Right.
for me, it is definitely something, it's a labor of love. I mean, I know
Yeah.
for you, it's a little bit different, Do
Yeah.
you struggle with that? Do you ever feel torn to make money over producing quality?
Yeah. Not really, because I always feel like, the content we're providing is the value. I mean, that's the free content. That is the show's free. It's out there. There's going to be 3 episodes next week coming out, and there's going to be one that somebody's going to love, and maybe another topic they won't even listen to, right? Because it's not in their wheelhouse. But it is content, it is free content. The sponsorship piece, part of that is right. That's monetizing a podcast. And I think everybody is kind of used to that now, especially if you do it right. I mean, when I listen to podcasts and they have like 4 sponsors back to back to back, that's kind of annoying. And there's ways you can do that are annoying. But I feel like when you have great sponsors that you love, it's easy because you love the product and you're going to use it. Like, for example, let me just say we did this trip. This is a good example that explained how cool this is. So we did this trip with the Mossy Creek Outfitter, fly shop in Virginia. This is we're doing these schools around the country. So this is our trout school east. And we went there and there's, it's really cool. There's spring creeks. There's the mountain fishing and all that stuff. But we had the spring creek we were on, and it was tough. These were giant rainbows that were just right out in front. This is Mossy Creek, right? And you can just see them, and they were looking at your flies and just say, no way am I going to eat that thing. And I took out my fly box, and I had a drift hook fly box, who's one of our sponsors, and I opened it up because nothing was working. And I looked at my box, and you'll appreciate this. And then what fly do I choose? He had a Royal Wolf in there, right? Just a dry fly, Royal Wolf, and it was old school. That's an old school pattern, but nothing was working. So I was like, you know what the heck? So I tied it on. I got above the fish and I dropped the fly in the water about 20 feet above that fish that I saw. And there was a few big ones, and it drifted down 20 feet slowly down. And all of a sudden it got above the fish, and that fish came up, and it was crystal clear water, looked at the fly, and he ate it. And it was fish on big, he's a 24-inch rainbow. It was awesome. Landed it really quick. The guy kind of, Nick, our guide on there, was like, "Oh man, you land things so quick," and all this stuff. But it was just as great. But that was drift hook, right? We used the flies from one of our sponsors, made this great epic moment. And so I feel like that's a good story to tell. And so those will come out on, like, right now, right? It's coming out now. But that's the sort of stuff where I like to do the sponsorship, where I'll tell stories and we will talk about our, the great sponsors. And I think people that understand that, and that's what happens, they support those companies because they want to support us and good local companies. So that's kind of how I feel about it.
I spoke with Brian Niska the other day.
Yeah.
And so what's going on there? Are you guys doing some work together?
Yeah, so Brian's awesome as well. So we had, and in fact, Steve Morrow, who's coming on very soon as well, who's, obviously related to your family, right? You have a connection there.
Brother-in-law. I love that.
Your brother-in-law. Yeah, so Steve was awesome. And so what I've been doing is I started out just me doing the podcast episodes, and I was trying to figure out, well, how do we make this a little more diverse and maybe better for, people listening? So I started first, I think, with either Jeff Liskey or Phil Roy. And I said, "Hey, what do you guys think about coming on and actually hosting the show and doing?" So it's not like your meat eater sort of thing where you've got all these different podcasts, right? It's more, the Wet Fly Swing is still the podcast, but beneath that are these 12 episodes a year, which are Jeff Liskey, we called the Great Lakes Dude podcast. We got Phil Roy, the Littoral Zone podcast, and then now Brian Niska in the Bucket podcast. So I'm basically helping, Brian and Phil and Jeff create a podcast, and it hasn't been easy, to be honest with you, right? Because I'm trying to get all the tech, going. And
I know. I tried this, by the way, when I first started Anchored Outdoors. Oh yeah, I was going to do.
Oh wow.
Exactly this. I was going to give with somebody in each niche their own podcast, and I was going to try to get 2 a month. But then I looked at it logistically, and it just was so much work. So I applaud you. I know how much work it is.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. And it's been great because, the episodes have been resonating with people. I know Brian's just getting started, but I know Phil and Jeff have been hearing from people that are loving it. And I've been looking at the numbers. They're getting, things are good there. So I think my long-term goal is to, if Brian really wants to do this long-term, same with Jeff and Phil, I think what I'm going to help them do is build their own podcast. So it might be more of a launching platform for as we and so the people we're working with, Brian, Jeff, and Phil, are all people we've done trips with. So they're kind of our people we're already promoting as we go, so that it kind of is a good fit.
Yeah, it comes right around. So you're obviously business savvy and not shy. You'd reached out to come on the show, and I was like, whoa, bold. Okay. If he's bold enough to ask, I'm going to say yes. I mean,
that's awesome.
We have to support each other.
Yep.
But
Totally. I appreciate that.
what does that mean for your future? The limit? How high, how far can you take this? Or how far do you plan
Yeah.
on going? Because you're still young and ambitious.
Yeah. Yeah. You love it. That's a great thing about your show is you ask good questions,
Oh, thanks.
and that's what is a podcaster, I mean, it's basically a casual conversation, right? That's what always the best podcast. And so I know I'm guessing you do this, but you're asking questions just off the cuff. You probably have, like me, I have a sheet of backup questions in case I forget, but are you just kind of going with it?
Yeah, I am not organized enough to have a
No,
list of questions.
I love that. And that's why your show's great. And
Oh,
that's why your show's
thanks.
great because that's what people want. They just want to hear that conversation. And if I was to read questions or you were to read, it'd come out and be terrible.
It throws me off.
But
Do you want to know what throws me off every time someone interviews me? When they stop and look down at their paper and
oh,
I'm
never
sitting there
good.
looking around like, oh.
No, not
So
good.
I just I don't like to break the eye contact. I like to stare at you.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Sorry.
right. That's right. Well, and now I just lost my train. So go back to the question. So I lost my,
Yeah,
what was
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
How far are you going to go? I mean, I
Oh
love
yeah.
this just from, I'm being super nosy right now.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
far do you want to take this?
Yeah. Well, I think really, I mean, the sky's the limit, right? Is always the thing. I think that, I mean, we got an opportunity I mean, and I could ask you too with the members group. I know it's not easy doing all this stuff, but I mean, with that, with what I have going there, and the app coming out, and then the sponsorship stuff continuing, I think, I mean, the plans are always to increase, downloads and revenue numbers and hopefully double, what we're at. That's the goal. But I know it's going to be more of a one thing in a series of ventures, right? There's going to be some
Yeah.
other things we're going to do. It might not be the Wet Fly Swing podcast. There's probably going to be something else out there we're doing. Maybe it's going to be the travel program where we're doing something around that. Maybe it's going to be some more events. I've thought about doing potentially some, these obviously fly fishing shows as you see some of them go away. There's maybe some online fly fishing shows that people haven't tried, right? And so there's a lot of that. I'm not even sure what it is all there, but I think the sky's the limit. And even though fly fishing is such a tiny niche, super tiny, my goal, I'm always going to be in the fly fishing. But there is, like you've seen, right? There is some room outside of fly fishing too, conventional fishing, hunting. There's a lot of that. So I feel like we're not going to be staying just in where we're at right now. My plan is to grow even bigger. And I don't know, maybe we will overtake the meat eater someday, right? Set your goals high.
I hope so.
Yeah,
No.
right.
No, I just would love to see, the little guy, quote unquote, little guy
Yep.
be able to take that leap because
Yeah.
the outdoor market, unfortunately, is really saturated with really
Yeah.
big money and really big players, which is great for the industry. But it is
Yeah.
nice to see some of the little guys, succeed without getting screwed because it's
Yep.
far too common.
Yep.
Okay, well, that segues me perfectly into my next question about you. What else do you do? Do you do hunting? Are you into that?
Yes, that's the cool thing. The cool thing about my outdoor thing is that I love everything. I mean, you name the thing. I mean, I'm not the greatest skier, the snowboarder. I'm not the greatest trail runner. I'm not the greatest tennis. You name whatever the sport or outdoor, but I love it all. Right. And so hunting is one of those things that when my first daughter was born in 2012, second one in 2014, I basically needed money to pay for, her birth. So I sold my raft. I had this amazing raft and I kept the drift boat. But sold the
Okay.
raft. And but there was other things that I gave up, right? I just had a bunch of hunting decoys. I was getting into duck hunting. I haven't duck
Right.
hunted since
Oh,
then,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
I know. So duck hunting. I'm a big, pretty much now what it is big game. And I'm not like one of these huge big game hunters, but I hunt deer every year. I try to hunt elk. It's been a little while for that, but pretty much deer is the big thing. I love the upland bird hunting as well. But right now it's just because I'm so busy. The deer hunting trip we do every year, I do a couple of those. That's epic for us. We kind of do our cast and blast trip. So that's a really huge trip for us. And then I'm getting the family back. That's the cool thing is like last year we had this amazing trip with the family, Megan, myself, our two girls were there. They're going to be 10 and 12, and they were out at hunting camp. And so it was so cool because it was the first time ever we said, you know what, you guys wait at camp. We're going to go hunt. And they did it. They didn't die. So I was pretty stoked that they were able to do that.
Winning.
And we got two big bucks and we had a pretty awesome year. You know what I mean? So that's my goal is my kids. I'm always thinking back at them, even though right now they're into their video, their games and stuff. I need to get them into hunting and fishing and everything because that's what's going to keep them, have a good life, I believe.
But even through all of those pursuits, you managed to maintain just fishing in the show.
for the most part. I've done a little bit of spring weed, 90-95% of fly fishing, 5-10%. I have done some hunting episodes. I've had, I can't remember all, there's been a handful of hunting. There's been a handful of other outdoor things, right? We just did one on Hank Shaw. Great. He's an
Oh,
outdoor cook,
yeah,
right?
fantastic. I love him.
Yeah, yeah, Hank Shaw. So I just had him on. It was, oh man, it was such a good episode. He gave me all these, for with the venison and everything. So somebody like Hank Shaw, when I find these people, I don't care whether they fly fish or not, they're coming on the show. We're gonna talk.
He is one of my favorite guests that I've had on my show. And I will
Oh
say,
yeah.
just plugging Hank here, I just bought yet his third. I mean, he's gotten more than 3 books, but I now
Yeah.
own 3 of his books. And I just bought Buck Buck Moose.
Yeah. Buck Moose.
That man has never let me down. I've got his fish book, his rabbit and small bird book, and then his Buck Buck Moose. He
Yeah.
has not let me down. And the other night I made his venison stroganoff. If anyone is listening, it's free on Google. Just Google Hank Shaw venison stroganoff. Game changer.
Nice.
I'm clearly hungry. I'm in day 2
I
of
know.
my quarterly 72-hour fast, and I'm just like,
Oh wow.
I'm salivating. Last night I was flipping through his book, and I was like, when I
Th-
break this thing, I'm going straight into that roast. Oh my gosh!
Does that not include does that break also like coffee drinks or is that just food?
Black coffee.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I'm a fasting junkie these days. I shouldn't say that. That's insensitive. I am a
Right.
fasting maniac. Is that
Yeah.
insensitive? I can't keep up.
I don't know.
Actually, on that, what about you? How do
Yeah.
you manage the PC? And just to kind of
know.
to preface that, I was online the other day and there's this foraging account, and she was like, I'm no longer using any of these words. Tell me the words that you don't use. And I was going through the list and my jaw's dropping at 250 comments of words that I got to admit, some of them were just dumb. Like they're taking it way too far.
Yeah, I know.
As a podcaster, though, I am certain there have been people who have canceled me in their own communities or in their own world because they're like, I can't believe she said that.
Yeah.
Rock on. I'm sorry that I know I'm not sorry that I offended you, but I am having a harder time nowadays finding the right words without being nervous about offending people. Have you struggled with this dilemma?
Yeah, so I think about that. And I definitely think about it, but I don't think about it too hard. I feel like I use my guests as the barometer. So I'm going to let them talk. And if they're going to bring something up that, I guess that is a good question. I'm not I'm not the one that's going to instigate. Like I'm not going out here to try to, although I will say, right, when you do this episode, when there are some, what's the word for it? Some controversial issues that come up, that definitely gets more views, right? When you have some of these topics and things, but I don't try to instigate anything like that, right? I just want to bring my guest on the show, have a conversation about fly fishing or their topic, and that's good. So I find it doesn't happen very often. You know what I mean? Like I don't, the 50-50, the women's thing, maybe is the best thing we could look at with that, right? Because I haven't done a great job at having equal women on the podcast. We're definitely nowhere close to 50-50, right? But I know that's kind of just
50-50 and I'm a woman, by the way. Just want to make that clear. It's hard because just from a logistical stance, and from a reality, there just aren't that as many women in the fishing industry as there are men. So I don't know if I'd feel guilty. Have you been hit with people complaining about that?
Not really, other than my stepdad, who or my father-in-law sort of thing. But no, I mean, I think he called me out. That was an interesting thing back in the day. He's like, "Why do you know there's hardly any women on your show?" And I'm like, "Oh wow, yeah, that's right." Because I wasn't even thinking about it. For me, I don't think about this stuff. I don't know, whatever the topics are, that come out that are the council, canceling me out or whatever. I don't think about that much. I just think like, hey, we're having this conversation. If something comes up and it's controversial, I try to not dig into it too deep. I guess that's probably how I handle it. You know what I mean? I try not to go down that road of too deep. Well, of course you got politics, you got religion. Those are things that, typically, that's the joke, right? On your guide trip, don't talk about that. But also even conservation. Conservation is very important for us. We do a lot of stuff, but even that's becoming kind of this weird. So that's the one thing where it is a little weird, but I haven't noticed that I've been canceled, although I think there's a few memes of me out there, I think somewhere and stuff. So maybe I have been canceled by some people, but I just don't find it. I don't think about it that much. and I really don't dwell on it. I just try to do my show and keep moving forward. So it really hasn't happened that often that I know of.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times we just don't know about it. It was interesting to read though those 250
Yeah.
comments and some of the things. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but some of the words were
Yeah.
really confusing because obviously I am a big fan of etymology. I love to know where words come from and where
Oh
phrases
yeah.
come from, but a lot of them have been just. I mean, a lot of
Like
them.
what's the example? What would be a word? What would be an example?
Okay, so stomping grounds was somebody used. They said I would no longer use the word stomping grounds because they're referring to indigenous rights. Now, listen, or an
Oh,
indigenous history. I don't
right.
know anything about this, but when I
Hmm.
looked up, because I do say stomping grounds,
Yeah, me
when
too.
I looked it up, it was referring to animal laydowns. But apparently, it's like old English. I think
Right.
1800s. I think elephants stamping grounds, and then was eventually morphed into stomping grounds. Now, of course, it could go
Wow.
farther back. Maybe, I don't know, but all I know is I'm not going to lose sleep if I say stomping grounds. And,
No,
and I think I was
me
sensitive to
neither.
this post in particular because the Instagrammer had said, I'm not going to use the word master anymore for anything. I'm not using master
Mm.
bedroom. I'm not using
Oh
master
wow.
this, master that. And as somebody who sells master classes, I was like, oh,
Oh right.
this is interesting. And while I could understand where she was coming from with that example, the following examples just got crazy. What were some of the other
Yeah.
ones? There was,
Gosh.
hang on. You know what?
Yeah.
I've got to pull
Yeah.
this
Pop
up.
it up.
I
Pop it up.
think it's so interesting.
And as you're thinking about that, this kind of came up to me too because I was in Virginia and we were fishing around Charlottesville and stuff like that. And I mean, there's still towns around the U.S., right, that are named Lynchburg and things like that. So like, there's all sorts of craziness going on there, and I know things are changing, but um, I don't know. I think some of it is part of like I think moving on. You know what I mean? I think we're not going to be able to satisfy everybody. That's kind of my take on it. But that's interesting. Master. I would never thought that was a cancel word.
Here's another one that I thought was interesting. Holy moly and holy smoke. And apparently,
Oh no.
people placed their babies on the burning hot arms of Moloch, and the smoke was considered holy, pure evil. She says it's pure evil. I always thought that holy moly came from holy Moses. Obviously, we went into a bunch of, or the post went into a bunch of disabled stuff.
Yep.
Grandfathered in. There's another term I use all the
Right.
time
Me
legally.
too.
Apparently,
Jeez.
grandfathered in or originates from laws created to deny the descendants of enslaved people the right to vote. Like it just went on and oh gosh, here's a really good one. And this
Yeah.
is why when I said junkie, I stopped myself.
Yeah.
This person stopped comparing something really yummy and tasty to crack. Example, oh, those grapes are like crack because of people who have struggled with addiction. And here's
Yeah.
gypped, the word gypped
Yeah.
for,
Gypped.
it just goes on and on and on. And some of them I can understand, but it got to the point where after, oh, I can't even look at the post because I'm getting myself
Yeah.
worked up. I'm
Yeah. No
showing my
kidding.
age here.
Yep.
I just know that I'm not the only podcaster who's struggling trying to stay on top of these ridiculous, a lot
Yep.
of, not all, but many ridiculous
Yep.
standards for being PC. And I
Yep.
didn't know if you were struggling with the same thing.
I'm not. That's funny when you say that because Matt, I mean, that is so far out there. I would never thought that was even something, master any of that. So I think I'm just out of the loop. I think I'm in maybe we're on my own place. So maybe somebody will correct that. But I feel like there's always the extremes of everything, right? There's
Yeah.
extreme this and the extreme. And I try to just be in the middle. And you know what I mean? I think we've done all right. I think that the way the world is, especially, you see the US, right? What's going on? I mean, it's so polar opposites, right? We're in this really crazy political thing. And I feel like it's going to change. I think that we need to be more center. People need to be more. I mean, I understand why you have the far extremes. I think there's some good to that probably too. But, you know, my take on it is like, we got to be able to get along and talk like about things. And I feel like some of this stuff that comes out is just so extreme. It makes it hard for us to talk and do things.
Yeah. How old are you?
49.
Okay. Ooh, big
Yeah.
50s around the corner.
Yeah. I'm right. I'm right. I'm like very close. And it's the age thing is weird because you know how it is. We all get older, our bodies change and everything changes. And I still feel like whatever, 20-year-old. It's a strange thing about life, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I'm almost 50, which again, if 20 years ago, 30 years, I'd have been like, wow, 50 is an old dude.
No. I mean, yes, I would have thought that 20 years ago too, but it's not old, is
Yeah.
it?
Right. Not, I mean, not now. I guess it's changed. I mean, my dad's 85. I met, Frank Moore. He was 95 when I shook his hand. He almost
Yeah.
crushed my fit when we shook his hand. I did that in person. The guy was 95 at the time. So there's all these people that are super strong into their 90s, 100s. So I feel like, yeah, 50 is kind of the new whatever. We're doing okay, or at least I am.
The new 40.
Yeah,
What's
the new 40.
who's your favorite guest that you've had on?
Ooh, well, we said one. Yvonne was a big one. Just because from the business end and what he's done for conservation has been, pretty unbelievable. But I go back to a few of the fun ones. I had the Fonz, from Happy Days, Henry
How did
Winkler,
you get
right?
him on?
For him, it was actually one of the easiest ones. I reached out. There's this thing called IMDb. It's for like the people that are in show business, Hollywood movies and stuff.
Yeah,
So you
I've
can get
seen it.
yeah, you get a membership. It costs whatever, $30 a month, and then you can get the context for all the managers of all these people. So that's what I did. I basically reached out. I found, oh, here's Henry Winkler's manager. I emailed her and said, hey, I did my thing on fly fishing. I knew Henry was a fly fisherman, and like a day later, she reached back and said, Henry will do it. And
That's
and
great.
so
How was he? Was he interesting? I'll have to
it was
listen.
awesome. It was awesome. Yeah, he was super interesting. There were so many, and again, it's because I was across from just like this. It's so surreal to be sitting there across from a guy that, he said in the thing, he said at his peak when he was doing Happy Days, I think he said he received 500,000 letters, physical letters a week saying how amazing he was,
I
right? I mean,
believe it.
he was at the top of the thing. But the really interesting was because we talked about fishing. It was kind of like half fishing, and I tried to sprinkle in some of his current acting and things. But he also is in Barry, right? This new show, which is this pretty great show, pretty hardcore, extreme. But I asked him Henry, like, why don't you love fly fishing? Why don't you just quit and retire, from everything else and just fly fish for your rest of your days? And he's like, why would I do that? I'm like at the top of my game right now in acting, right? He just got an Emmy in Barry, right? He's 76 years old, so he's basically said I'm at the top of my game and I'm 76. There's no way I'm getting out of this.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it. Who
So,
else have you had on? This is so interesting.
so let's see. What are some of the other fun ones? I mean, I always go back to, I used to do every 100 episodes, I'd have a big guest. So like Joan Wolf was huge for me as well,
Oh,
because
yeah. Yeah.
she's such in my girls, I'm always thinking about how do I show my girls, other women that are doing great things out there. So, that was cool. And who else have I mean, there's been so many. Again, I always remember the first 200 episodes, and I know you're about 240 right in there or something like that. So you probably maybe remember a lot of
Oh
your.
God, am I in the 200s already? I thought I was still in
Oh yeah,
100s. Hang on. I thought I was
no,
100s. Now you've
I might
got me
be off.
questioning myself.
Yeah, verify
If
that. I
I'm in
thought.
200s, I'm going to be very surprised. Keep talking. I'm listening. Sorry.
Oh yeah, but yeah, once I hit above 200 into the 300s, I started to not remember all my guests just because there's so many going on. And now that we're at 600, I can't even remember, kind of last week's guest almost.
See,
But
that's what I'm afraid of. What you just said there
yes,
is what I'm afraid of.
yeah,
That.
yeah,
I feel like I'm a collector and I feel like
yeah,
I've collected all of these stories and they lay dormant in me. So when I need to be inspired, I think about certain people's stories. You mentioned Frank Moore. He's one of the
yeah,
people I think about
yeah,
often when I need inspiration in my relationship. When I need
yeah.
inspiration as a mother, I think about someone else. When I need information or inspiration for conservation, I think about Hillary.
That's awesome.
I have this little library and I am terrified of losing them. I am in
Yeah,
200s. Oh my God.
yeah. Well, I thought
243.
exactly. Yeah, you're killing
Holy, I've
it.
been busy. Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Thanks.
you're doing great. So. Yeah, I mean, but it is one of those things where it is a lot of guests and a lot of content. There's no way I can, but I've got this catalog of episodes and but I mean, I just go back to some of the trips we did. I mean, we mentioned it, like Brian Niska when I went up to the Skeena and fished on the Skeena with Brian, and we had this whole experience with we had 6 people that came up in this trip, essentially a hosted trip. I mean, that was awesome. And to meet Brian in person and to hang out with Brian, right? And to do that thing, he's such a cool guy. Same with Jeff. When I met Jeff Liskey the first time, we went to the South Shore of Lake Erie and we got on the water. I right away knew that Jeff is one of the greatest guides in the world, probably.
At Anglers, he is the fishiest person
Yep.
one of in the top 3 fishiest people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah. Yep. So that was awesome. So I mean, I think of those and like Phil Rowley, of course, with all the Stillwater stuff. I built a relationship with Phil. So all those people, I mean, Rick Kustich, we just did one with Conway Bowman on Mako sharks,
Great
right?
guy, yeah.
That was crazy to listen. Like people are catching these giant, like basically humongous sharks that will eat you, on the fly rod. So I love those episodes, but I kind of get excited, not only about the Henry Winklers and the Happy Days, but also about just the areas like I'm going to be going to. Like we went to this Virginia with Mossy. I interviewed Colby, on the podcast, and we're fishing for tiny little brook trout, and it was a great trip, right? And so I kind of get excited for everybody. It's hard again, but you're right. I definitely can't go back and tell you the 630 people I've had on right now off the top of my. I'd have to look back at it.
As podcasters, is there anything that we should be discussing?
You mean like what do you mean? Like just
I,
anything?
I don't know. I mean, you reached out and I know you wanted to chat. And
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was anything in particular you wanted to chat about or if you just wanted to share the show on my show, if it was a marketing thing, which I'm happy to do because I support
Yeah.
you. But
Yeah,
was there
totally.
something else in particular that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, that was kind of, I mean, the bulk of it, what I'm doing, like, just so you realize, I'm going around. This is part of a thing is I want to be on your podcast and be on, everybody's podcast as time allows, but there is part of it is a growth piece, right? You being, what is the best way to grow your show? You get on somebody else's podcast, right? So now I'm in front of your listeners, but you got to provide value and be, valuable. So I have put together something which is a summary of our top I took those 600 episodes and I checked it into the top 5 things that I've heard most often, right? So I have this little snippet. This is a real basic value. I know your listeners, would you say your listeners are more a mix of new and very experienced or all over the place?
Yep, total mix.
Yeah, total mix. So I've got this little kind of a summary. I could share it here, but it's basically 5 things I've heard most often. You've probably heard it a lot as well. So I was going to share that just to provide some value. But part of this was, yeah, just getting to know you a little more and basically get on your show and trying to let folks know, hey, there's this other show. If you haven't heard about the Wet Fly Swing podcast, I'm out there. But it is a growth tool for sure, because if you go on social media, this is kind of the business piece. You go on social media, 50% of the people on social media don't listen to podcasts at all, right? That's just it. So whenever you share it out there, half of those people don't listen. If you go on to another podcast, 100% of the people listen to podcasts. So there will be a little chunk of people that might listen to my show, and if they like if I resonate with them, maybe they will listen long term. So I've been actually out on a number of different shows. I'm on the circuit. If you look at movie stars, guess what they're doing? They're getting featured on other shows, right? They're doing the same thing. They've got some people have a whole team of people reaching out. For me, it's just me. And obviously, I told you when I was on your podcast the first time, you were a big inspiration for me because you were going before I started. So to be able to come back on now and be doing this is my, saying thank you again, you know what I mean? Because I think that you and Tom at Orvis, have laid the way for a lot. And there's a lot more podcasters that have been above me. And those shows, if they ask me to come on the show, I'll bring them on my show. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I do it. I feel like that rising tide. So does that make sense as far as where I've come from?
Yes, it does. It also sounds like you've just read Traffic Secrets.
Oh, I haven't heard that. No, what's that? Who's that by?
Isn't it Russell
Oh,
Brunson?
Russell Brunson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know he's a big proponent of that. It's funny because I get gun shy. I know you, it's different, so it's a little different because
Yeah.
I was on your show and because
Yeah.
Brian mentioned you the other day.
Yeah.
But I get a little gun shy now because I get invitations often to be on other people's podcasts, but then they turn around and hit me with an expectation to be on my show, which I don't think is fair because then it makes me feel like I've been kind of duped.
Yeah.
And so I am a little bit gun shy. And I was going to ask you, how do you manage that? And also, have you been on Tom's show?
No, but I'm working on, I mean, all these things so I have one of my assistants doing some outreach along with, the other stuff we do. So I haven't, but yeah, that's the goal, is to get on Tom's too, because if I can get on yours and Tom's, that would kind of put me in the, that'd be 2 big goals. That would be awesome. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, for me, if this episode didn't resonate and didn't provide the value that you think your listeners want, I would expect you not to air it. You know what I mean? Like for sure, I would not feel bad if you didn't publish this. In fact, coming into this, I was nervous. I was nervous to go. And I mean, I think a little bit of anxiety is good because that keeps you on the edge. But yeah, I mean, this is probably the most nervous I've been for a podcast because of, I mean, like I said, you kind of helped me get going. But I do feel like we provide value. The show we do is great. But at the end of the day, yeah, if I'm not providing your listeners value right now, do not air the episode. I would not feel bad about that at all.
I will be airing the episode because I think that this is interesting. And I think it's kind of nice to give an inside look. A lot of people have questions. They don't know the behind the scenes. And I think that this provides a little bit of info there. But let's stay on this topic. Just speaking about numbers and clicks and all of these and promotion. When I was working with Meat Eater, there was a major focus on trying to get guests who had high profile audiences because what they were looking for, and rightfully so, if you look at it from a business stance, is get on high profile guests, get them to share it on their Instagram or their Facebook or whatnot, or their podcast. And then you will get more people listening, uploads, obviously you get more downloads or listens, and then your sponsors are happy. Okay, that's great. I understand that. Personally, I didn't feel comfortable going that route because I'm more interested in someone like a Frank Moore who doesn't have, 500,000 followers on Instagram.
Yeah.
So let me run this by you. The other day I was contacted by it's been a lot of agents. I get a lot of agents emailing me these days. And this particular TikToker has got millions of followers, but her main focus for her following is OnlyFans, which I don't care what you do. I do not care what you do in your spare time. Yep. But I didn't feel like I had anything to talk to her about. So I politely declined the episode. But had I said yes, it would have had millions and millions of people on TikTok. How do you manage that? I've got very strict lines with my integrity and how I feel moving forward with the, anchored focus for my listener. What about you?
Yeah, I love that. That's it's not an easy question to answer, but I think that the way I feel is that, I think you did the right thing because I don't choose any guests based on the size of their thing, and I find that I'm trying to think of some of the guests, who's a good one. Davey Wattens I'm talking to tomorrow. So, I know he's out there, but I love the old timer guests as much as anybody, and I know those are usually the people that don't have any following. You're never going to get any bonus there, but definitely that is not my focus. Like if I did that, I think our show would be tanking, if we so my focus is to get the best guests. And the cool thing is what I've done is because we've grown large enough that we can get feedback from our listeners. I actually reach out and get most of our new guests from listeners. So they're emailing me or I'm getting feedback and they're telling me, yeah, you should get this person on. And I do this even right now, your listeners, as they're listening, if anybody wants an episode on the podcast, I will put that together. All they got to do is reach out to me, Dave at wetflyswing.com, and I will put together an episode for you. And I do that. And honestly, and not that it's going to happen tomorrow, but I have a whole spreadsheet of people that have done that. And I'm just checking off boxes. And I feel like that's something I know one person loves that person. They said enough that they wanted to get that person on. And so that's a good thing. And again, there's always going to be maybe where that's not a perfect fit, right? But for the most part, I can't think of more than maybe one or two episodes where it hasn't been amazing on the interview. And I feel like if I'm not bored, it's good.
I actually really like that. That's very cool. I could see that working. So you've got a spreadsheet, and do you put who the referring person is? Yep. Do you mention them in the show?
In the show, you mean the refer? Yeah, I try to. Yeah, I'll do a little break and I'll say, hey, I'll make sure it's okay with them. But yeah, I do. I will say shout out to Jim, whoever, he hooked us up or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really cool. What do you recommend, or do you have any advice for people who would like to start their own show?
Ooh, yes, that is a good one. There's so much because the podcasting thing has been like so and all of that has been so huge. What is the best tip? I think the best tip is, again, it's one of my tips on my top 5 from, keep it simple, is always the great tip, because people think that you got to have a great microphone and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, you could record a podcast with a cell phone if you had to, whatever. And so keep it simple and just get started. Because your first episodes are probably not going to be as good. They might suck, but it's the body of work. Again, it's all about, back to the war of art. It's all about the body of work. You talk to John Gierach, another person I love. When he finishes a book, he's not sitting back, jumping out with joy and saying, hey, I got the greatest book ever. He's already starting his next book. right? So I feel like that's an important thing I've always thought about, that I'm always moving forward. And um, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think that does that make sense kind of on that track?
It does. Do you get a lot of people asking you how they can follow in a similar path
Yes,
or
I
down a
do.
similar
I
path?
do. I do. And I've helped a lot of podcasters in our space and other spaces. I've helped a few people start shows that are out there. And I tell them that that's one thing. Start simple, and like we said, it's start with get good guests. I mean that's a good start, and be I always say consistent. Be consistent. You want to focus. We've done an episode every week since 2017. That's part of our success. Part of it is also I love it, and it's something I love talking to people. Not everybody's going to love podcasting, but you know what? Try it for 10 episodes, and if you really love it, now you can go down. If you don't, you didn't lose much. Just give it a shot. That's kind of my advice. There's a lot of technical stuff you can get into. Like we love Riverside. That's the app we use now for our recording. There's lots of tools out there and things like that. I can tell you this Shure MV7 is awesome. The PodTrack P4 is this great unit I use for recording remotely. And there's all this tech stuff. But at the end of the day, a podcast, I like to say, keep it simple. Just get started. Just make a plan, put on the date. I'm going to do my first, it's going to launch here, just like anything, and stick to that date and launch it out and just get better as you go.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. I second that. Well, listen, I am happy that we went through with this. I commend you for your ambition and for being so bold. I think it's
Yeah.
it's admirable. Is there anything that you would like to ask me while you have me here?
Oh man. Uh, I guess one thing I would say on you've I mean, I've been following your journey as well. I mean, there's been lots of changes along the way too, and with your members. So I guess my question would be, how has it been for you as things have evolved with your fishing? I know for me, sometimes I struggle to get out and do as much of the things I love. Have you seen that as a struggle for you, getting out doing the things you've liked, or have you I loved how you've been evolving into different things?
Well, having a podcast, having an episode only every 2 weeks definitely lets
Yeah.
me keep fishing.
The other quick question I'd have for you is looking ahead, as you look, you 243, like, are you going to continue doing more of the same, or how does that look?
Yeah, I'm still inspired.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's awesome.
I feel like I struggle, and I think you're probably the best guest for me to be able to be transparent with,
Hmm.
and do more talking than listening in this case. I do struggle with the business side of things. I'll look at, or when I read your email, I'm going to be totally, completely vulnerable here. I read your email and you were like, "Hey, it's Dave. These are my
Yep.
numbers. These are my downloads. This is basically why my show is amazing." And I was like, "Holy shit, I'm a failure." You know what I mean? Like it really, and so I'll hear from,
Right.
there's like a couple other
Right.
podcasters that I speak to and I read their numbers and I look at the potential ad revenue and I go, God, I
Yep.
am such a, I'm just a failure from a podcasting stance.
No.
And so I struggle with that sometimes to keep going. I'll be like, what is the point? My numbers are going down. Since I left Meat Eater, my numbers aren't the same. But then I,
Right.
I have to remember, I don't do this for that. I never
Yeah.
did this for that.
Yeah.
I do this for that collection, like we were talking about, in my head to be able to pull from the stories to stay inspired. So as long as I am learning, and as
Yeah.
a woman in her 40s, I feel like I'm always learning, then I will,
Yeah.
yes, I'll keep going until I basically feel like I'm no longer pulling from that collection.
Yeah.
Does that make
That's
sense?
that's such a perfect answer, because I love to hear that, and that's another good advice for new people that want to start a podcast. You don't have to make money at a podcast. That's the great thing about podcasting. You could just do it because you love talking to people, whatever. So I think it's awesome that you're able to do that. You know what I mean? And that's inspiring right there. The fact that you're still doing this podcast with all this content and the work, and you're just doing it for a different reason,
Yeah, look, there's
right?
some
And so
ads. Like
that's what's amazing about it.
I will take sponsors. If anybody would like to sponsor the show, come on over.
Yeah.
And obviously it's set up on the Waypoint Network. They run automated ads,
Oh yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like YouTube, where it's specific to your country.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, I mean, it just basically covers my time and my software and my
Yeah.
monthly fee to
Yeah.
Waypoint. So, but look, yeah, so
Right.
it's nice to be able to be honest about it though, because I think that a lot, and
Yeah.
the show, I mean, 4 years ago, the show had over 10 million downloads. It's not a failure
Yeah.
by any
No.
means,
No,
but
you're
I want to make it clear to people, all of us who podcast or would like to podcast, there's a lot more shows out there now. So it's inevitable that
Yeah.
numbers are harder than they
Yep.
used to be because, or, the
Yep.
downloads aren't what they used to be because there
Yep.
are more shows. But if we're being true to our listener, isn't that a good thing that they have so many people to choose from? So I just
Yeah,
try to
it
keep
is.
my mind in that sort of healthy headspace that this is for the better good of everybody moving forward and the industry. I mean, think about,
Yeah.
I once felt this major pressure to archive all of this history. I felt a lot of pressure back,
Right.
8 years ago to have this enormous library for when we're all dead and gone that the
Yep.
historians could go through and piece everybody together. But now they can pull from you. They can pull from, I mean,
Yep.
Tom's always been around, but there are,
Yeah.
I'm leaving off a bunch of shows, but there
Yeah.
are
There's a bunch.
tons that they can pull
Yeah.
from.
Tom
So
Show. Yeah. All the saltwater. There's, yeah, I agree. I had that same thought is that, yeah, I want to archive this stuff, but I agree. I think these guests, it's all going to be out there forever,
yeah.
which is
All right.
great.
Is there anything else that you would like to add or to ask me? And that's obviously another generic question, but
Yep.
it's yours for the taking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm good. I really appreciate this. This has been definitely been awesome. And it's been cool to hear from your side. I always love doing these because I've done a number of these where I'm getting the questions thrown at me. And, like I said, your show is great because you ask good questions. And
Oh,
any
thanks.
podcaster, I think, is going to be, the better questions they ask, the more curious. There's another tip. The best podcasters I interviewed, I have another marketing podcast I do. I didn't even talk about that today, but I interviewed the guy that created the NPR podcast. He basically started podcasting back in the day. And yeah,
No, no,
and
tell what's the other podcast?
well, it's actually pod faded, so we haven't, because I've been so busy with this other stuff. It's gone through a couple of names. So it's not actually, we're not even doing new content now, but I've got about 40 episodes where I've interviewed everybody, like 40 marketer all around podcasting and, you name it. Right. So my Facebook ads expert is the person that I interviewed. She's awesome. All these people, but and I'm trying to, again, back to the names. I'm trying to blank on the name, but the guy I interviewed who told me about the tips on podcasting, I'll look it up for you because it's really good. He wrote a book about it. You'll love it. But he said the number one thing is for a podcast, successful podcaster, you have to be curious. That's it.
I
Just be curious. You
totally
can't fake
agree.
it.
Yep. That is so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's great advice. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any
Curious.
advice you'd give me?
I seriously think you're killing it. I mean, your numbers, all that is awesome. You've been kicking butt. I think that as long as you're having fun, I wouldn't change anything. I think you keep doing what you're doing, and that's my thing. If I'm not having fun, I'm going to change something. But as long as you're having fun and everything's going great, I don't think you should change anything.
Yeah, so true. No, I love it. Look, it's been a pleasure. We will wrap it up. Where can people find you?
Best place is wetflyswing.com. And I did put a little link out to wetflyswing.com/anchored. Nothing big, but there's a little link. I did a little episode there. It's the top 5 things I learned from these 600 in so they can check that out. The top, well, 3 are things that you'll just be like, oh yeah, it's obvious. But so I put that out there, but that's it. Wetfly Swing everywhere on social. And yeah, appreciate all the time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I will stop recording. Don't hang up.